Hey, what's up guys? Thanks for stopping by the channel. So for today's video, we're going to talk about the roadmap that finally led to me picking up this Tudor Black Bay GMT, a watch that I initially dismissed because I thought it was really overhyped. So to give you guys some context, back in 2018 at Baselworld, which happened to be the biggest watch conference that took place in Basel, Switzerland, around this time each year, Tudor as well as Rolex did some piggyback announcements because they talked about releasing a new GMT model. Now in the case of Rolex, this just happened to be really a reissue of their GMT Master 2 in full stainless steel and an accompanying Jubilee bracelet. Now this GMT had their Cerachrome Pepsi bezel, and it retailed for just over 12,000 Canadian dollars. But of course, there's no way you can pick one up at retail. You would have to go to the secondary market and pay basically double that in today's market conditions. But then interestingly, Tudor made a similar announcement. They noted that they would be releasing a Pepsi GMT as well. It had their newly developed GMT movement inside and retailed for under 5,000 Canadian dollars and happened to be fairly available. But before going further into the video, I'm curious, have you guys ever picked up a hyped watch? And if so, what's your experience? Make sure you comment down below on your personal experiences. Or alternatively, let's take this conversation over to WatchCrunch.com, a new platform designed specifically for better watch conversations. WatchCrunch is the sponsor for today's video, and I'm actually happy to be partnering with them because I find that this is a resource that I personally missed when I started off my watch journey and YouTube channel several years ago. Now this website is absolutely free to use, and signing up is quite easy and intuitive, and you can actually customize your own personal experience by selecting the types of watches and content you like to consume. Now I should mention that WatchCrunch.com was developed by watch nerds specifically for us watch fanatics. So you're not going to be finding a lot of negativity or people living that flex culture on Instagram. And whether you're just starting off in this hobby or a seasoned watch collector, some of the conversations and connections you can make on this website are very beneficial and can inform your future decisions when it comes to buying watches, trading watches, or just sharing your thoughts on which watch YouTubers you want to follow. Now I'm personally active on WatchCrunch.com, so why don't you drop by, say hi in my profile. Okay, so other than being overly hyped, what were some of the other factors that really turned me off of this watch? Well, shortly after this watch was released, there were reports of date wheel issues with their new in-house caliber MT5652. So some people were reporting that the date wheel would advance on them about a day or a day and a half without them actually operating the crown. And in other situations, the date wheel might stick. So if you would actually try and engage the GMT function or just set to a different reference time, the date wheel would not move or synchronize appropriately. Now, of course, Tudor did reassure people that that was a weird quirk, and because this was a newly developed movement specific for this watch, they were working out some of the kinks. And in fact, they have reassured people buying more recent iterations of this watch, and including my watch here, that that issue is no longer persistent. And then outside of this GMT model specifically, I kind of had a beef with the Tudor 41mm Black Bay watches because they are quite slab-sided and thick, coming in with a case height of just under 15 millimeters. And if you compare that to, say, their Black Bay 58 line, you might as well be wearing a skyscraper on your wrist. And finally, the last common characteristic that's really true for pretty much all the Tudor Black Bay models is I don't find that their supplied bracelet and clasp overly comfortable. And it's mainly for those reasons that I really never gave this watch another look until more recently. So then you're probably wondering what kind of got me to change my mind and be interested in checking out the Black Bay GMT line in the future. Well, the first thing that I really noted is that this watch is photogenic as hell. I mean, it's got a really nice pop of color with the Pepsi bezel and kind of a matte finish to the dial, but some nice silver polished rhodium markers. To me, it was also attractive because of Tudor and their use of snowflake hands. Give me snowflake hands over Mercedes hands from Rolex any day of the week. And I'm glad that they didn't include a Cyclops over the date because I do find that a little bit divisive personally. Another thing that really drew me in about this watch is actually handling it in person at an authorized dealer because you really have to factor in the value proposition. At sub $5,000, you are getting a true traveler's GMT movement, and this is an in-house manufactured movement. The caliber MT5652 has 27 joules, a really nice 70-hour power reserve, silicone balance spring, and is also COSC certified, which essentially means that this watch is going to run quite accurately. Now, I'll quickly just distinguish between what a true traveler's GMT is compared to, say, more of like an office GMT, because with lower tier watches, especially ones based on an ETA architecture, a lot of those GMT functions, you can independently jump the 24-hour hand, just so you can be able to tell what time it was in a different country. So for example, if you were working in an office and you had a client overseas, you could set that quite quickly so you would know what time your client was available. But it's much more practical, in my opinion, to have the true traveler's GMT function, which will actually allow you to jump the local hour hand, so basically where you end up, independently of hacking the movement. In that way, the 24-hour time is your reference or your home country time zone, and then if you do cross time zones, it's really easy just to adjust to that local time by independently jumping the hour hand. And then if you were to pull out the crown all the way to extremity for this particular watch, then you would actually hack the balance, stop the seconds hand, and you can synchronize the entire watch to any time that you would like. Now, without handling this watch in person, you can also miss out on some of the nuances and the aesthetics for this timepiece. And I really like that Tudor maintained a lot of its vintage styling with this watch. Like, the absence of a ceramic bezel insert initially turned me off because, of course, ceramic is way more scratch resistant. But with a true aluminum bezel insert, it's going to fade and patina with time, which would kind of make it look a little bit more vintage. Another nice touch that they did, and you really wouldn't see in press photos, is the way that they slightly domed the sapphire crystal to rise above the bezel. It makes it look like an acrylic crystal in many respects, giving you just a bit of distortion at those extreme angles. And it's a subtle touch, but also ties into the vintage aesthetic for this particular watch. And then if you consider the overall aesthetics of the dial and bezel, it's more of a matte finish to the dial, and aluminum doesn't become as reflective as ceramic. So overall, it's less flashy than a Rolex GMT Master 2, and it really ties into more of a tool nature for Tudor watches, because at the end of the day, this watch is also a diver with 200 meters of water resistance. But conversely, being kind of a dive watch, I was a bit turned off by having really small indices relative to other divers from Tudor or Rolex. But also having that extra GMT hand actually makes the watch a little bit more easy to read at a glance, I would say. It's a little bit more vintage, and you have a little bit more negative space to work with when you're trying to include a GMT function on the watch. And the last thing I do want to talk about is the wearing experience, because as I mentioned, the OEM bracelets from Tudor from their 41mm Black Bay line really aren't that conducive to being comfort, at least in my experience. So a large portion of that wearing experience was attenuated when I threw this on a Jubilee bracelet from Uncle Seiko. And I gotta say, this Tudor GMT on Uncle Seiko Jubilee looks the business. So it really does recapitulate the look of the GMT Master 2 on its Jubilee, but you get more vintage styling. And the articulation of the individual links here and the clasp on the Uncle Seiko bracelet is a little bit better, and it does lead to long-term comfort on the wrist. So guys, that's kind of where I landed on this Tudor Black Bay GMT. I don't change my mind on picking up a watch too often. But as always, if you guys have a similar story about changing your mind about getting a hyped watch, do leave it in the comments below, and make sure to carry this conversation over at WatchCrunch.com. And if you guys do enjoy this content, please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. It helps out a ton. And as always, I can't wait to catch you guys in the next video.